Well, you should see my cameraman dancing to the tune of her say. It's a beautiful show because then women are beauty. And, you know, a beautiful thing to equally see that men are also joining in these conversations that, you know, ensure that the women have a safe space. And that's basically what we'll be having this evening. Delighted to have Preeti Herman, as I had earlier on, you know, introduced her. She is a co-founder and equally the CEO of Inu Collective, Nguvu or Inguvu, as they would rather pronounce it. And I'm excited to just get to know, is it about Nguvu power or what exactly about Inguvu and what exactly this then visionary institution or perhaps entity is doing towards making sure that we all get that Nguvu as women. Her say is largely about women, but we do not leave the men outside because we are what we are because of them. Thank you so much, Preeti, for creating time.
Thank you for having me here.
I know Nairobi is quiet, so you would say it's raining and all that. So finding someone coming all the way is great an honor.
Well, the culture where I come from, rain is a blessing.
Oh, yeah?
So I just think it's a good omen that I'm here and it's raining.
And it's raining. Thank you so much once again. So here we are, Nguvu or Inguvu.
Nguvu. It's the Swahili word.
It's a Swahili word.
So
also, Ladi, that's where it comes from.
Yes.
Power.
It comes from power.
Tell us something small about Nguvu Collective.
Nguvu Collective basically means the power collective.
Right.
It comes from a certain vision that this world will be a much better place if we have people from marginalized communities, especially women,
right,
step up to lead things and change the world. And if we have more women or stepping up to create change, we will actually see more long-lasting change and better lives for people around the world. And the way we do that is by shifting the power of women, which is, like, you know, essentially the largest disenfranchised group in the world, 50% of the population, women who actually go through a lot of marginalization.
Right.
So what do we do to shift, if we were to shift the power of these women so that they can become leaders and lead change, it means good news for the world.
Right.
And so the way we do it is by bringing them together and trying to tap into the power of an individual through the collective and through the community.
Right.
Therefore, Nguvu Collective.
And not to wish away the efforts that has been put towards making sure that there's this change in society. You have been running this for close to about 20 years, 2 decades, if I may call that, you know, the exact number. Yes, or basically this initiatives, you know, just joining women and all that.
Right.
My question then would be, what are some of the transformations that we've witnessed as a society, perhaps here in the country and beyond, in terms of making sure that all this is achieved?
Right. So Nguvu Collective is actually just 1 year old.
Nguvu is, but you yourself.
My work, yes. I've been, so I come from a background that has some privilege and not so much privilege. I come from India. I grew up in a really small town until the age of 15. I wasn't allowed to go out of my house without somebody accompanying me because it was a very conservative community I grew up in. And I think at around the age of 15, I knew that I had to move to a big town to be able to learn to speak English, to be able to access opportunities which I would never otherwise have. I think otherwise I would have probably been married off at a young age, either with responsibilities of a wife. And I wanted to try something else. I thought I could do more. But I think just my experience of growing in a community like that and then seeing how much almost all women experience this, I realized it's actually a very shared experience and of not having power, of not having agency. So that took me on a journey of trying to find out how can we actually shift power. So I played around with the idea of organizing people in communities. I worked with communities, indigenous communities, and Dalit communities in India. I spent some time living with them, just trying to understand how do they shift their power? How do they make their voices heard? How do they make themselves seen?
Right.
We did some campaigning. So I tried different ways and tried to experience different forms in which people shift power. And about 10 years ago, I was part of building out something called a civic organizing technology called change.org, change.org. We built it out in India.
Right.
And the idea came from the fact that the change can be everlasting if the solutions come from people who are affected by an issue. And so what if we gave them a platform to suggest what the change needs to be and drive that change? And so once we built that, we noticed a very interesting trend. We noticed that while male counterparts started a lot of campaigns and petitions on the change.org platform, and women started very few. However, they won more campaigns, much more than their male peers.
Right.
And so when we started looking into the data and understanding what is it that gets them to win, we saw that the women were using their own personal story of an injustice, and then wanting to, moving beyond their pain to saying, I want to change this for others.
Right.
Just because it happened to me doesn't mean it has to happen to others. So they go for this inbuilt leadership in them. They also never did it alone. They always wanted to build a community around them. They would ask others to come and contribute to their campaigns. And so I went around trying to find out what was it that we could do to support women in their journey. And one of the predominant answers I got from the women we interviewed and spoke to, actually I'm going to ask you, can you take a wild guess? What do you think is one of the biggest obstacles for a woman driving change or wanting to step up into a space of leadership?
I wouldn't want to take a wild guess. I don't know whether my opinion is allowed in this case, but one of the key things I would say or highlight is the fact that we ourselves as women have perhaps been one of the greatest obstacles, because in as much as we want it, we do not step out. In as much as we want that change, we probably are shy. In as much as we want that change, we're always busy trying to cut the steps that other women are doing. So I would largely say that.
Right. Okay.
Others would say it's a patriarchal society. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the jury's still out, but I think what we've begun to see nominally is that the biggest response we got from the women who were trying to lead and drive change was that it is such an isolating journey to be a woman trying to drive change, to be a woman doing whatever they are, a pathbreaker.
Right.
And so we built out this entire program while we were with the technology company Change.org, called She Creates Change. The idea was, how do we help more women shift their power by running campaigns and winning them, but not doing it themselves, but doing it together as a group.
All right.
And from there, in about 5-6 years, we got to know that this has potential to become so big. And so
could that be the, and I think that's why I started by asking not to whitewash what it is that we have done, the strides that we have made. But the question then would be, for very many years, there's always this kind of talk. Is it truly because we come from a patriarchal society? Is it truly because, well, it's an isolated journey, so to speak? Is it truly because women do not really want to come out? Is it truly because the men are really not supporting us in all these efforts?
Can I make a small correction there?
Right.
Patriarchal society doesn't mean man versus woman. Women can be equally patriarchal.
Yeah.
Men can be feminist. And the idea, the patriarchal society believes in a system where men are given more opportunities than women are. Women are given specific spaces to work or be in. Them trying to get beyond that is really shunned down.
Right.
Either in the form of violence or culture or religion, whatever it is. And so, does patriarchy play a big role in women not being able to advance? Yes, absolutely. Does that mean, am I actually saying men are responsible for that? No, I think men and women are equally responsible.
Okay.
Do we need to see a world in which men and women have equal opportunities?
Definitely.
Yes. But that doesn't always, it's not a thing where it's just about the woman who's trying to make the change. It can't just be fully on her. It actually requires us to make the right environment for them as well. And I think we have a responsibility there.
Right.
So anyways, I think about a year ago, we realized, why don't we actually make this about an African and Asian thing and have communities of women in Africa and Asia leading change? And therefore, what we're doing right now, which is women in collectives driving change across Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa.
Just how unique, and I know you have begun by highlighting the fact that, well, we probably have common concerns. But I'm sure it narrows down to a point where we say then, well, the women in Africa are more disadvantaged. You know, the women in Africa have unique concerns that are local compared to women from Asia, for instance, compared to women from other, continents and other countries. Just how unique and different are some of these concerns? And I mean, how would you treat the same concern in Kenya vis-a-vis, say, in India?
tell me why you're asking me that question. Are you asking me because you want to understand the solutions for these problems?
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. And perhaps for the viewer, for them to get to understand this, because I mean, there's always this thing that is painted. And perhaps you would help us understand whether this is just a myth, this is just an assumption or anything, that is just way, way difficult from these countries that are considered third world compared to those that are first world. And therefore we need to borrow so much from them and all that. Yeah.
I think patriarchy and sexism wears different masks in the global north and the global south. It's still there. It exists in different forms. I think the way it shows up, and therefore the lived experiences of the marginalized communities, are very different. Are there commonalities between women's lived experiences in Asia and Africa? Yes. Are they exactly the same? No. There are differences, which is actually why, so the solution we're thinking of is not a solution where a media house or a non-profit is going to drive. Okay. We're saying the solution needs to come from, if it's a problem in Kenya, and if it's a problem in Nairobi or Kisumu,
from the women themselves.
It needs to come from the women there.
Right.
And that's what gives you long-lasting change. So actually the solution, the problem, needs to be identified by the ones who are experiencing it, and therefore also drive the solution. And we are only here to facilitate a process where we support them on that journey.
All right. So let's talk about Inu Collective and what exactly then it does, probably that is different from what it is that you've done all these years, that actually, or maybe that complements what it is that you've been doing over the years, and complements as well the concerns that need to be addressed at the level of the specific grounds that we're talking about.
Sure. So let me actually take an example of, we're in Kenya, let's talk about Kenya.
Yeah.
What we do at Inu Collective is actually support women to come together as a collective, as a community, and really help connect with each other and build a community of support for each other. Because if isolation is the biggest barrier for them to show up as leaders, let's break that by ensuring that you have a good community of support around you. So that's the uniqueness of this model.
Yeah.
What we do is we have a 3-step process. We bring the community together. We work with women to help them identify the change they want to drive. And I'll talk about some of them right now.
Yeah.
We help them with campaigning. We actually really help them shift their brand about how they're seen by the media, by decision makers, by influencers. So they're seen as strong voices, as they should be, by all of these people, and are seen as people driving solutions, not just raising the issue, but driving solutions, and therefore someone who needs to be heard. And we do that in a place where the community really supports each other in doing that. Therefore, it's not just about one campaign. They go on to run multiple campaigns, either together or separately, but over and over again. And in the process, influencing a lot more people to be like, oh yeah, if they can do it, I can do it too. So I actually want to give you an example.
Right.
I want to talk about a woman called Josephine. She's from Nairobi. She has cerebral palsy. She's a person with a disability.
Right.
About 7 years ago, she was pregnant. She went to a hospital. She was in labor. She went to a hospital. A few hours into the labor, the hospital said, we're sorry, we can't take care of you because we don't know how to handle cerebral palsy. And they asked her to, while in the middle of her labor, asked her to go to another hospital. So she was being shunted from hospital to hospital while in labor, and a woman with cerebral palsy.
Okay.
And finally somehow got the attention, and it was such a traumatic experience. She came out of that saying, this is really difficult, especially for people with disabilities. There is absolutely no support, and people don't think how is it okay?
We probably don't even sit down to imagine.
Think about it.
Yeah.
So she started a campaign to try and get all hospitals to have hotlines where people with disabilities could pick up and just report any kind of discrimination. Similarly, there were a couple of other women who were talking about a little bit of abuse or neglect that they were experiencing in hospitals. They were part of the same collective, so they began to notice that there are similarities in the campaigns that they're running. And they said, wait, there is something called obstetric violence, and I'm happy to talk about that.
Yes.
Obstetric violence is basically a form of abuse or violence women face during pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum. And it's actually quite prevalent in Kenya. We just don't have the numbers for it. And women know it, they see it, they don't talk about it. And so 3 of them who had very similar campaigns and had experienced, one had experienced her sister going through massive obstetric violence and just wanted to change something about it. They came together to say, you know what's missing right now? What's missing is evidence. Let's try and get some evidence. So they reached out to almost 200 women across Kenya in different counties, including slums. And then through various means got data trying to find out if there is obstetric violence that's happening. 83% of them reported being abused.
Just how intense and just how far can it go? Because sometimes actually some of them are probably not aware that this is some form of obstetric violence that is accorded to them.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a simple, it's a simple insult I would want to call it. Okay, well, an insult is almost straight to it.
Yeah.
But maybe it's a simple word of discomfort that is, thrown to you. And you probably are just thinking, well, the nurse is overwhelmed.
The doctors are
tired
yes.
and all that. And
Yes.
maybe it's because we're so many of us and
Yeah.
maybe I've not done the right
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So at what point then does one get to know that this is it for them to even say, let
Yeah.
us report,
Yeah.
and then for it to add up to this huge number?
Right. So the violence that was observed in the report, there were 3 kinds of it. There's the entire psychological abuse, so basically being yelled at, being abused, and like being called names, all of that. And it is, when you're in labor, it is quite a thing to experience something like that. Then there is a whole form where there's medical negligence. They neglect serious conditions. And then there's also violence. A big group of them actually were slapped, hit. And the medical negligence involves just very bad practices that has meant that they have lifelong deformities or challenges because of what was happening. The interesting fact in this is most women didn't know this is obstetric violence.
Yeah.
It is not a thing, right? And so what these 3 change leaders who were trying to shift small things by themselves did, they came together and they're now trying to really push and showcase evidence that this is actually one of the biggest challenges Kenya is facing right now. And it needs to be talked about because it has an impact on mothers' health, children's health, and therefore the economy. And it's a massive human rights violation. So that's what I'm trying to say is it goes beyond one individual and their experience and what they want to drive to things that could possibly shift national policies and the lives of millions of women and children.
And you have taken it upon yourselves to probably, I would call it research in relation to this, for you to have discovered some of these numbers or perhaps for you to have collected data revolving around this. Just how far has the research gone and what importance would it be in terms of making sure that then we switch this to, a different phase where then women will feel safe in the event that they're going out there to give birth and all that?
So we don't do the research. We support the change leaders in what they want to do. Some of them say, let's collect evidence and we want to kind of research on these things. We said, sure, let's help you. And so what came out of that, they actually put a report together, which actually showcases and puts evidence for the first time ever in Kenya on obstetric violence itself. And what they've done, actually, interestingly, is they have case studies, they have numbers, they've done like a very in-depth way of collecting information. It's not the only way to do it. It's definitely a fantastic first step. And they have now been in touch with MP Gadoni Wamchumba, who actually,
yes.
She had tabled a proposal for developing national policy on obstetric violence. And so this becomes evidence for that, right? Like it becomes a solid point, proof point to say this is actually a big thing.
Hence the need to document.
Yeah, the need to document, but also the silence around it needs to be broken. And when it goes from one person's story to now 200 people having the same stories. Can I just read out some of the things that...
Sure.
Like the experiences here, which these are women who have...
Real stories here, real experiences shared.
These are experiences. So one woman saying, yes, I almost gave birth to my first baby girl in a latrine at the hospital.
Okay.
Another one saying, the nurses didn't stitch me up well since I was badly torn. It required surgery, but they didn't mention it. Another one saying, after giving birth, I noticed that a part of my clitoris was hanging. I went back and I didn't get any help. So prolonged labor, abuse, the kind of stuff, the amount of like pain, lack of dignity, like the kind of violence that women are put through, and also therefore the implications on the children from deaths to deformities, etc. We need to talk about it. And these women are taking regular citizens, very regular women who've decided they want to take matters into their hand and showcase how this is actually a national level crisis.
Yes.
And that policymakers need to actually move on it.
Right.
Along with cultural shifts and other things as well. So that's one example.
All right. And I'm glad that you highlight concern in relation to cultural concerns, traditions and all that. Most of the efforts that have been put on board to address this issues that would concern women, one of the biggest barrier would be that aspect of the cultural bit of life. How has it been like, just navigating to the different spaces and getting to the grassroots and getting to the grounds to address these concerns that you speak about, to address this in relation to, engaging the policymakers, engaging the legislators who, like you rightfully say, they are working with Gathoni wa Mushomba. Just how open, is the leadership towards making sure that some of these changes are not just, or these concerns are not just documented, but equally we visualize elements of change?
I think it's been a slow process, but definitely not a bad one. I think when people come together, and there is a bit of a shift, the media plays a very big role, but people coming together, being able to very clearly articulate what the problem is and what the solution can be is always a helpful first step. Being able to collect evidence of stories, so it's not a one-off incident, that many people are experiencing that, therefore becomes step 2. The media and influencers and social media plays a huge role because they talk about it a lot more. All of these things influence decision makers. And we've seen women drive a lot of policy level change across the world, in my experience, on issues that started off with a personal experience of injustice and then realizing it's a big issue and therefore it needs to be changed. I think Kenya has been quite strong and responsive. We've actually had a lot of MPs and senators engage with us, engage with our change leaders and their campaigns, and wanting to really kind of like work in partnership as a democracy should. And I think Kenya it's been good so far, and I think it'll get better.
All right. And we certainly hope that it does get better. Briefly, I know you have highlighted OBV as one of the concerns that you address. There are numerous other concerns. And perhaps then the argument would be, we have not even dealt with period poverty. What makes you think we're going to get to this point of addressing OBV? We have not even addressed the concern of women actually getting access to healthcare services, and good access to good healthcare for that matter. That is at the moment of, giving birth and all that. So what makes you think that we should take seriously these concerns of OBV, and what are the chances that same would be addressed?
I think if you think of change making as a relay race, that question makes sense. As in like one thing needs to happen and then the next thing happens. Yeah. That's not how change happens. That's not how narrative shifts happen. That's not how cultural shifts happen.
Right.
Things happen, they bubble up, and they're not always driven by people in power. Sometimes it's driven by the regular citizen, a very ordinary woman who wants to shift something and uses her story very powerfully, and then gets the spotlight and becomes the voice of those who are experiencing same discrimination. So I actually think the way this work is built out is also for women who are driving all of these changes to actually get the spotlight and be seen for the change that they are driving. We are already beginning to see how they are role modeling to other people, how change can be done. And I want to use you as an example. Can you imagine how many women are looking at you and thinking, oh, if you can do it.
Right.
She has a role model. If many, many decades ago, it was probably impossible to imagine such a great journalist or an anchor sitting here, a woman that too, and being able to have a conversation which is not, entertainment only. It's a serious political conversation. And here you are, being a role model. And that's what our change leaders do. They step up, take space wherever they can. They do it alone sometimes and sometimes in community. And they're shifting things little by little here and there,
from
like
left,
a
right,
beehive.
and center.
Yeah, like a beehive.
There's always that change that we yearn for. We still have lots to talk about. Allow us to take a quick short break, and then we come expound some more, because our business here, is making sure that we have a safe space. We have changed the society for it to be better, not just for the women, but equally for the boy child, who are always saying that we focus much on the concerns of the women, that we tend to forget them. After this short break.
Na safari hii katika Mfahamu Kiongozi tutakuletea viongozi aina mbalimbali.
Nikuwe na Nisani kama 10 na pia nikuwe menua minibus. Minibus nikoniwa.
Kushinda unaangalia simu ya mzee. Soma Biblia ama ingia kwa washroom ujisugue. Mpaka nimetoa hivi.
I don't know whether any of my children would want to get into the political field. Sijajua bado.
Kila Alhamisi saa 1:30 kuendelea.
Join us on a journey through the concrete jungles and rising skylines, where every beam, every nail tells a story of progress and vision.
In every aspect of life, you have to look at several dynamics.
From groundbreaking,
Nowadays with the tech, you can check on different websites or you check online and you can see some inspiration. So at least that one would be a direction already. I'll know like what kind of style you're going for.
to finishing touches, witness the dedication of the hard-working teams who bring these ambitious dreams to reality. The Realtor, Tuesdays at 6:30 p.m.
Na safari hii katika Mfahamu Kiongozi tutakuletea viongozi aina mbalimbali.
Nikuwe na Nisani kama 10 na pia nikuwe menua minibus. Minibus nikoniwa.
Kushinda unaangalia simu ya mzee.
All right, Prithia Haman is our guest tonight, the CEO Inu Collective, and we're all about these conversations that revolve around making sure that we have a positive change, social change for that matter, especially addressing the concerns of the women. And this, in a big way, does not, get to points where we're going to say that we're shunning, the efforts that have been put on board to equally make sure that the boy child needs are actually taken care of. We are just saying that we're trying to create a society that is favorable for you and me, for everybody, every kind of gender. So we come back to you, and we're talking about OBV. We have highlighted some of the concerns that have been raised, and it's evident that we have a problem, and a problem that is at a high magnitude. How then do we come together? We talk about policymakers to make sure that we shift this and make it a game of the past, even before we come to address all these other problems that women face.
Well, it's a very deep-rooted issue. And so I don't think the solution is going to be just driven by one person. Even the 3 change leaders who drove this, Josephine, Harriet, and Deborah, I don't think they will be able to drive the holistic change that's required. You need to have decision makers in there, but it also requires people. Well, let's talk about regular citizens, like us as humans, right? When we notice that somebody we know is afraid or is worried about a certain form of violence, we immediately know it is a problem.
Yes.
And how is it that we can show up for them? How do we support them in that? Or if we know that somebody has experienced violence, our immediate response is to look away or tell them it's okay, it's over now, let's move on. Which is actually a very unfair thing to do, not just for yourself or your family or your friend, but to the entire community, because you're allowing for that behavior to repeat over and over again. So how do you show up as an individual, as a friend, as a sibling, for someone who is either afraid of this kind of violence or is experiencing that? Starting from there, to can we actually start talking about this being a form of violence instead of us just being like, yeah, it's fine.
It happens. Actually, most of the people will tell you it's so normal, and they actually laugh about it.
Yeah.
But this is what I experienced.
Yeah, it happens all the time. Just move on, right? Like, but it has a serious implication. Why should we move on? How is that okay? And just being able to ask that question requires a lot of courage. But maybe that's where we start. And I just we might not have all the solutions, but just kind of challenging that a bit and saying like, that's not okay. Why is that okay? And then what can we do about it is the first step that I think any of us can take. And I think different people will find different solutions for that. Most women in this survey did not even think about reporting about it because they didn't know what their options were. They were really scared of pushback. They didn't even know what the stigma would be, and they thought they would be laughed at, you know? And I just kind of also saying, if I report someone, what would that mean? Would they come back and hurt me? So basically that's a very big space of fear. How are we okay living in that fear, you know, as people who are watching these people go through that? So I think there are at multiple levels challenging that to actually talk about it more and call a spade a spade. Right. It is violence. It is obstetric violence. It is one of the grossest forms of human rights violations. And it exists. It exists here. It's actually happening in the city, in this country right now as we speak. And most of them might not even report it or might just look away because it's normal.
What does it breed eventually? And I'm glad that you mentioned this, because out of this, we are privileged to have met very many people who maybe have shared their experiences. And I don't even think that is a privilege, because they're sad experiences to listen to. And some will even tell you that these cases of cerebral palsy, you know, arise after such concerns, after, you know, carelessness at that level of, you know, helping a mother give birth to a child. So when we look at this, what are some of the notable then damages that would come along with such cases if we're told we are going to continue being silent?
Well, we are allowing for a huge crime to continue to happen in our country. And I think we need to ask ourselves, is it okay for us to be living in a society that allows for that level of crime at a moment of birth, which is just, it is such a vulnerable moment. It is such a delicate moment. And it has such an implication for future generations. Right? And so this has an implication for maternal health. It has an implication, maternal, physical, biological health. It has implications for mental health. It has implications for the children that are born, for the deaths that there are, for the kind of injuries that there are, if this is such a huge form of violence. And so I just thinking about it, not just in the form of, oh, it's happening somewhere, but thinking about it as something that if women are birthing children at almost every minute of every hour in this country, and if this is happening to a majority of them, it is actually a serious issue. And we are allowing for such a big crime to thrive in this country, in our society. This is what we are preparing our future generation for. So that's something that's more of a deeper question to think about and see if you're okay and comfortable with that.
Well, if it happens, please make sure to speak out. So we also are talking about very many concerns. And now that you say you speak to women down on ground, they must have highlighted beyond all obstetric concerns. There are equally very many other concerns that have been highlighted. Talk of period poverty, talk about the CAT, female genital mutilation, talk about most of the concerns in relation to early marriages, that you're released out there to be married pretty much early. You have no idea, you can't figure it out and all that, but all the same you have to go. And very, very many heinous acts that are meted upon the girl child. just what goes on in there? What are some of the notable experiences that you've had, and what are some of the changes that you're trying to drive?
I just want to clarify, a lot of these issues, even OBV that we just talked about, it's not a woman's issue. If it is a man's issue too.
Right.
It is a family's issue, and it is a community's issue. Because if a woman is immobilized because she was treated badly while having birth, and if something has happened to the child, it impacts the man in the family, it impacts the larger family. It actually kind of, maybe she can't go to work after that. Maybe the child has serious issues that needs to be dealt with lifelong. So it's just because the starting point of that is a woman doesn't just make it a woman's issue. It is everybody's issue. Similarly, period poverty or female genital cutting, they're not just women's issues. They are issues that actually will come back and affect each one of us and our experiences. I say each one of us, both men, women, and everyone across that.
In your interaction with the society down there, do you feel like the men really understand this?
It depends on how you tell your story, and it actually depends on how you want to tell the story. There are men who are clearly at a place where they don't know what's happening, slightly, apathetic to it. There are men who are curious because it has impacted them, but really don't know. And I think men can be very strong allies in all of this. And I do think a big part of our work is also trying to figure out who are our allies, both men and women, because women can. There are women who would equally oppose this, right? Female genital cutting. Is something,
a cultural thing.
It's a cultural thing. It's promoted a lot by women themselves. So it's not a man versus woman thing. It is about a very unfair and a fair and an equal world. And some people bear the brunt of it a lot more, but it impacts everyone. So how has the response been? Those who gain to benefit from it obviously have a very defensive stance. Those who have also been impacted because it's happened to women in their households are curious about it and could be allies. And there are those who are not impacted by it, don't gain from it, are apathetic towards it. Both men and women. And I think we're not living in a world where we're trying to convert everyone at the same time. But it's about most of these change leaders actually try to find out who are their allies, who can work with them, who can walk along with them and support them in that journey. And I think I'm pretty sure almost all of them have very strong male allies, as much as women allies in their fights.
Just how crucial is education in this?
In changing issues?
Yes.
I would say very, but I don't think we should confuse literacy with education. Education is awareness and an open-mindedness to engage with things and challenge yourself. Just because you're literate or have a few graduate degrees doesn't mean you're open-minded and therefore wanting to engage with things and just really wanting to change things or make things better for people. Educating people about the issues, absolutely important, because otherwise you're just assuming that people will understand automatically. And I think personal stories and narratives play a very strong role in that education.
All right. The women are here and the leadership. I'm just looking at your profile and the numerous things that you have done. Have you played this beyond the country? Just how far and wide have you covered when we're talking about Africa, the sub-Saharan Africa?
In Africa, we are focused on Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa for now. This is the model that has been tried in India, Brazil, Indonesia, Japan, many other, even Colombia. So in different continents, the global South continents. But we are now focused in trying to support change leaders, emerging change leaders in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. So that's actually our current focus right now. But I do know, true to the power of communities, this will grow. and it will expand beyond those countries soon.
Right. How do we get the women involved, or is it you who actually go to them? How do you identify that this one is a good ally, this one, is a woman automatically? One would want to assume that is an ally automatic by default. But then again, how do we get them to soften their hearts, to understand that these are concerns that we need to address collectively?
Stories. You and I,
stories, yes.
If we were to sit here and I were to kind of begin to tell you what my experience has been and growing up, or being a professional,
right?
I'm sure you will find connections because we all have shared experiences. Being able to share our stories and being able to pull people in because of those shared experiences is the best way to build allies.
Mm-hmm. And the same would call for funding. The same would call for traveling. The same would call for so much. How are we managing this? This drive, this kind of drive is a kind of drive that you just do not wake up. I mean, if you're going to work on such a good booklet and document it, then this would call for research. So this would call for funding and all that. Just how are you managing it? So
right.
Yeah.
Well, we are a startup. We've got some initial investment. We are hoping to build this into a community-centered model.
Right.
But like I told you, even though the model's been around for about 7-8 years, it was incubated in a different entity. As an independent entity, it's just about a year old. And we do have initial investment for it. I'm sure we'll talk in a few years' time, and I will be telling you about how
story of success. Okay.
And we will be telling stories of how our change leaders are driving a lot of that, and probably raising the money to drive this work and lead this work. And I think that's the hope and the dream.
That is the most beautiful thing, of course, that we're looking forward to hear when you're talking about us talking years to come. African, Asian, you said that you have focused much on making sure that there's this form of an umbrella. How is it working?
Good. There's a lot of shared experiences.
Right.
To your question from earlier, there are differences, nuances that are more cultural, but the experience of what one feels is similar. We actually do have a very strong community of change leaders in India. We draw a lot of experience and examples from them.
Yeah.
We're beginning to see Kenya and our change leaders in Kenya just kind of go at a completely different level altogether. I think I'm quite excited for the community of change leaders who are growing here, and what they will do in the next 3 to 5 years. And I do think that slowly they're beginning to collaborate and share ideas because of shared experiences. But yeah, good. Short answer.
All right. So, okay, beautiful. Penetrating the rural areas, if you have at all, and of course acknowledging the differences that are witnessed, in this, urban areas compared to the rural areas, and getting these change leaders to sort of come into a common ground of understanding and of change. Again, would largely be driven by the fact that we have similar stories, or it goes beyond that?
A lot of our change leaders are from counties that are not, that are rural.
Yeah.
And each of those counties have very specific issues that come from there. Even on period poverty, like a lot of our change leaders with lived experiences of not having a pad, a sanitary napkin, just watching their community and how women deal with periods, would therefore come with solutions that are more relevant for that community and therefore for a larger group.
Yeah.
The beauty of this community is not the differences, but the commonality. And what does that mean? It means that there is an understanding that there is a difference in privilege. There is a difference in experience. But how can I show up for you as my fellow change leader? How can I really influence and reinforce your campaign and ensure you're seen and heard for your leadership? I think that's what the community tries to do. So it's not a competition. It's not, putting one thing against the other, because there are issues that are very big, that are city-oriented, and then there are issues that are very specific and rural county-oriented. And how can they all live? And how can these change leaders how can the ambition to change every one of that live together?
Right.
And how can the change leaders support each other to drive that change?
Okay. So most of the time, say, when you go to different areas, that have unique concerns, do you always go there, first of all, to do your homework and understand that maybe this is a problem that is unique to them, and therefore this is what we're going to tackle first based on priority? Or perhaps you have, certain programs that you would want, to spread the same across the different counties?
Yeah, you asked me this earlier. I don't think I answered this clearly. The way we put a call out, so we start with what's called a 5-day training program. We call it a launch pad. We put a call out and ask people to apply. We're specifically looking for upcoming change leaders from marginalized communities. Normally a lot of people apply, and especially if we've already had 1 or 2 cohort like we have in Kenya, a lot of them who've been through that process will reach out to their own community and say, hey, you should apply for this because I've been through this. So a lot of word of mouth. And they go through a selection process. We don't do more than 30 at one go, because that's as a cohort and as a community, as a smaller unit, 30 is a good number to kind of build a good sense of community. And so we repeat that process, but at one go it's always 30. And so women apply for these programs, and then they go through a selection process where my team and other change leaders help identify people, especially those who are coming from marginalized community, especially those who really need that help, and how do we support them? And then they start the process with us.
And you speak of where you come from, all the way, from India, and just how much a small community maybe that was, and that element of respect for culture and traditions, and the worldview of these people. Of course, coming to merge this to make sure that there's some element of synergy so that we get this, social change that we're talking about. There are people who are pretty much focused much on their cultures and everything, and they'll tell you this is our social contract, and therefore it's not easy to break this. How is it that, how are you managing in terms of making sure that there is a proper blend, a seamless blend, that we do not offend the cultures and sometimes the gods, if you'd want to call it the deities, and make sure that at the same time this change is felt and the importance of the same is experienced? Yeah,
it's a very good question. I'm not driving the change.
The people themselves are.
The women from the communities are.
Okay.
And so they drive it. They know what the cultural nuances are. My team and I are there to support them and say, how can we make you amazing and help you really drive your change and impact? And so the agenda is not ours. The agenda is theirs. We are just facilitating a process for them. And so we try to do that. That's one answer to this.
Right.
But I do want to put this in a larger context. What my team and I are trying to do is trying to build something so uniquely not a white organization. It is something where we believe that the energy for change can come from Africa and can come from Asia. It can be black and brown led. And it's a very ambitious goal, especially in a place, and especially in a larger world, where that's not how things are, and the majority and the privilege sit somewhere else. And the way to respect that, and the way to do that, is by recognizing that thought leadership and change needs to come from the ground. It can't come from someone who is a CEO of an organization. So none of these issues, none of the campaigns that I talked about, none of the change leaders I talked about, none of them are influenced by my agenda. They tell us what they want to do. They drive the agenda based on what they want to change in the world. And our role is to facilitate and support that.
Right, most of the times, and through your experiences and all that, they bring valid concerns and valid proposals to instilling change. Would you be rigid to perhaps what it is that they would make as a proposal? Because sometimes you think this is a beautiful proposal, but equally you probably have seen similar concerns somewhere else, a different approach that really worked. And how do you get them now to buy into this kind of ideas?
Well, we don't.
At all?
We don't. We actually...
I know you have said that it's literally driven by them.
Yeah. Because they know the realities best. Our job is to give technical expertise on how to run a good campaign, how to really shift things, and how to bring more, how do you organize more people? How can you be seen and heard a lot more externally?
Right.
But there is a role the community of change leaders play within themselves, where they support each other and also try to balance things out. I do need to say that at a very top level, what we are actually looking for are progressive ideas that benefit humanity, which actually can't be rigid on anything. It actually has to collectively benefit a large group of people. And if it is doing that, and it is about a woman driving that change because she has come from a certain experience, it's not somebody sitting in some place, not associated with an issue, thinking, oh, maybe I should do something for these people sitting here. That's not what we're doing.
For a long time, that has been the approach. And I mean, I think I've had people saying that it's fine, you have brought us solutions that you are pretty much not, equivalent to the concerns that we're having. And therefore, maybe that's the reason why we have not gotten so much of long-lasting change. Do you suppose that has been the biggest problem? And maybe this kind of a different shift would be helpful?
Yeah. That's the basis of the work that we do.
Yeah.
The solution to problems need to come from people who are experiencing the problem and therefore might have the best answers to the problem.
Right.
And so how do we support them to actually take space and drive that change in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa?
All right, beautiful. Thank you so much for the great, work that you are doing. I know it can be quite something, but all the same, it's passion-driven. It's driven by the people down on ground. Then it is bound to succeed. And so as you speak to them, just probably tell them how they can reach out to you in the event that maybe there are people who would want to register the next, moment of registration, and how then we can have these change leaders who would actively want to transform society, then to join in.
Of course. First of all, thank you for listening in. I am very appreciative of your time. If you do think that you can drive change and you really want to create change in something that you have experienced, we'd like to support you. You can follow us on social media. We are Nguvu Collective, NGUVU COLLECTIVE, on Twitter and on Instagram. You could also write to us at kenya@nguvucollective.org, and we'll be happy to, my team and I would be happy to get back to you.
The words reach out, and there are very many people who are not online. But anyway, we see that the world is headed to a space where it's
one
all
step
digital.
at a time.
One step at a time. All right, thank you so much, Preeti Herman, for speaking to us. One simple word to the girl out there. One simple, word to the women who are watching us today in terms of just making sure that they're part of driving change.
One word.
And not one as such, like parting shots.
You are so much more than what the world has told you you are. And you are so much more bigger than your current circumstance. You are so powerful. And I can't wait to see you shine.
Beautiful. Co-founder and the CEO of Nguvu Collective, Preeti Herman. Thank you so much for speaking to Her Say this evening. It's always a great pleasure having women, just reminding us just how important we are and how capable we are of driving that element of change. We have to close it at this very point. It was nice speaking to you as well. Lots of feedback coming from the people who are appreciating the drive that you're making, some of them interested, and I'm sure you have gathered what it is that you need to do if you want to be part of this element of driving change. My name is Linda Alela. It was good having you. We have to close it at this very point. Remember, I was doing this again with our sign language interpreter, Rhoda Nyamai, who left earlier on. And of course, we see you again sometime next Saturday on Her Say, but tomorrow, to the point.